The Nutcracker and the Mouse King by ETA Hoffman. Chapter 14. Conclusion. Prr, puff. Down fell Mary from a measureless height. That was a fall. But at once she opened her eyes, and there she lay on her little bed in clear daylight, and her mother stood beside her, saying, "How can you sleep so long? Breakfast has been ready long ago." You take notice, honorable listener, that Mary, quite bewildered by all the wonderful things she saw, had at last fallen asleep in the hall of Rock Castle, and that the boys, or the pages, or the princesses, with their own hands, must have brought her home and put her to bed. "Oh, mother, dear mother, wherever has young Drosselmeyer taken me through the night? What fine things I have seen!" Then she told the whole story almost exactly as I have just told it, and her mother looked at her in amazement. "Dear Mary," said her mother when she came to an end, "you have had a long, beautiful dream, but now you must shake all of that out of your head." Mary obstinately stuck to it that she had not been dreaming, but had really seen all this. So her mother took her to the glass cupboard, brought down Nutcracker from the third shelf, where he stood as usual, and said, "How can you, silly child, believe that these wooden figures from Nuremberg are alive and able to move of themselves?" "But, dear mother," broke in Mary, "I know very well that the small Nutcracker is young Herr Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg, Godfather Drosselmeyer's nephew." At this both her father and mother broke into a loud peal of laughter. Mary went on, almost in tears, "now you are laughing at my Nutcracker, dear father, and yet he spoke so well of you, for when we came to Rock Castle, and he introduced me to the princesses, his sisters, he said you were a very respectable physician." Louder still was the laughter, in which Louisa joined, and even Fred. Then Mary ran to the next room, made haste to bring out her small treasure box, the 7 crowns of the Mouse King, and handed them to her mother with, "Just see there, these are the Mouse King's 7 crowns, which last night young Drosselmeyer presented to me as tokens of his victory." With astonishment, the doctor's wife examined the little crowns, which were so skillfully made out of a very bright metal quite unfamiliar to her, that they seemed the work of no human hands. The doctor, too, took a good long look at them, and both father and mother seriously urged Mary to confess how she had come by these crowns. But she would only stand by what she had said, and when her father grew stern with her, even scolded her as a little storyteller, she began to cry bitterly and to lament, "Ah, poor child that I am, what else can I say?" At that moment, the door opened. In walked the counselor, crying out, "What's the matter? My godchild Mary crying and sobbing. What's the matter? What's the matter?" The doctor told him the whole story, showing him the little crowns. No sooner had the counselor set eyes on them than he laughed and said, "Silly stuff, silly stuff. These are the charms which long ago I used to wear on my watch chain, and I gave them to Mary as a present on her birthday when she was 2 years old." Neither the doctor nor his wife remembered them. But when Mary saw that the faces of her parents had become friendly again, she sprang upon Godfather Drosselmeyer with the cry, "Ah, Godfather, you know all about it. Do tell them yourself that my Nutcracker is your nephew, the young Herr Drosselmeyer from Nuremberg, and that he gave me the little crowns." "Oh, silly stuff," muttered the counselor, making an ugly face. Then her mother made Mary stand before her, and spoke very seriously. "Just listen to me, Mary. You must have done with all these fancies and absurdities. And if you say again that this commonplace misshaped Nutcracker is the nephew of Mr. Counselor, I will not only throw Nutcracker out the window, but also the rest of your toys, Missy Clara, too." Now, indeed, poor Mary could no longer speak of that which filled her whole mind, for you may well suppose that such splendid and beautiful things as had happened to her are not to be forgotten. Even Fred turned his back on her when she tried to tell him of the wonderful land in which she had been so fortunate. He is said even to have whispered, "Silly goose," at her, but the good nature he showed her at other times will not let me believe this. Yet so much is certain that, since he no longer put any faith in Mary's story, be formally, on open parade, retracted the wrong done to his hussars, gave them, instead of their lost cockades, much higher and finer feathers from a goose quill, and permitted them to play the Hussar Guards' March again. Well, we know what courage these hussars had shown when the mouse balls came whistling at their red waistcoats. Mary might speak no more of her adventure, but that marvelous fairy kingdom still hovered round her in sweetly fleeting visions and beautiful echoes. She saw all its glories once more as soon as she fixed her mind on the remembrance of them, and so it came about that, instead of playing as she used to do, she would sit still and silent, her thoughts far away, till everybody found fault with her for a little dreamer. It happened that, as the counselor was one day mending a clock in her father's house, Mary sat before the glass cupboard, deep in her dreams, looking at Nutcracker, and she could not help bursting out loud. "Ah, dear Herr Drosselmeyer, if you were really alive, I would not behave like Princess Pirlipat and despise you when you, for my sake, had ceased to be a handsome young man." Silly stuff," exclaimed the counselor. Then at that moment came such a crack and a jerk that Mary tumbled fainting from her chair. When she came to herself again, her mother was petting her and saying, "How could you tumble from your chair? Such a big girl. Here is the nephew of the counselor come from Nuremberg, so you must be nice and well behaved." She looked up. The counselor had again put on his glass wig and his drab coat, and was smiling very agreeably, and he held by the hand a small but well-formed young man. His little face was as white and red as milk and blood. He wore a fine red coat laced with gold, white stockings and pumps, had stuck in his bosom a most beautiful nosegay, and was most elegantly curled and powdered, and behind his back his hair hung done up in a bag. The little sword by his side seemed to be all jewels, it glittered so, and the small hat under his arm was woven out of flakes of silk. The young man lost no time in showing what pleasant manners he had, for he gave Mary a quantity of splendid playthings, especially the most lovely toffee and the same figures as the Mouse King had bitten to pieces. But for Fred he had brought a wonderful fine sword. At table the polite visitor cracked nuts for the whole party. The hardest could not withstand him. With his right hand he stuck them in his mouth. With his left he pulled up his head. Crack! The nut fell in pieces. Mary blushed rose-red as she looked at the nice young man, and she became still redder when, after dinner, young Drosselmeyer invited her to go with him to the glass cupboard in the parlor. "Play prettily together then, children," said the counselor. "I have no objection, as all my clocks are now in order." As soon as young Drosselmeyer found himself alone with Mary, he knelt upon one knee and spoke thus. "Ah, my dearest Miss Stahlbaum, you see here at your feet the fortunate man whose life you saved on this very spot. You were good enough to say that you would not despise me, as that nasty Princess Pirlipat did, if I became hideous for your sake.
Now I am no more a common Nutcracker, but have received again my original, not unpleasing form. Oh, excellent young lady, bestow upon me your precious hand. Share with me my crown and kingdom. Reign with me in Rock Castle, for there now I am king."
Mary raised the youth to his feet and said softly, "Dear Herr Drosselmeyer, you are a good-natured, kind-hearted young man, and you also reign over a delightful land with very pretty, amusing people. So I take you for my husband."
So then Mary and Drosselmeyer became at once betrothed. When the engagement had lasted a year, he is said to have fetched her away in a gold coach drawn by silver horses. At the wedding danced 22,000 of the splendidest puppets, decked out in pearls and diamonds. And Mary is now queen of a country in which sparkling Christmas tree woods, transparent toffee palaces, in short, the finest and most wonderful things are everywhere to be seen by those who will only have eyes to see them. So ends the story of Nutcracker and the Mouse King.